The royal guards reached for their stun lances, but the little alien girl threw herself in front of the human. "He's not scary," she cried, voice cracking with desperation. "He's gentle." The court froze. Even the queen, veiled in light and tradition, faltered for the first time in decades. In a palace where humans were barely trusted to fix walls, one small princess was willing to start a war just to protect the man she called her friend. Before we dive in, tell us where you're watching from. We love seeing how far these stories travel. And if you believe kindness can change galaxies, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode may just shatter your heart in the best way. The Palace of Aravel shimmered like a glacier under twin suns, its crystalline walls humming with coded light. To most, it was a temple of elegance, but to the maintenance crew, it was a puzzle of aging circuits and unpredictable pressure valves. Deep beneath the grand halls, in the corridors no royal ever walked, a man in a navy blue utility suit knelt beside an open panel, his hands blackened with ancient sealant. He hummed softly, a tune from Earth, low, steady, forgettable. That was his goal, to be invisible. His name was Grayson Holt, a former aerospace engineer turned palace technician. Most aliens barely registered him as more than an appliance with arms. That suited him. After the loss of his wife during Earth's collapse, silence had become a shield he wore without question. But today, the quiet broke. A small voice echoed down the corridor. "What are you doing?" He turned slowly. Not startled, he'd heard the soft footfalls earlier, assumed it was a drone. But this was no drone. A child stood there, barefoot, glowing faintly with the pink-violet luminescence of the Aravellan royal line. Her hair shimmered silver blue, tied messily in a top knot that tilted like a comet tail. Her eyes, huge and curious, studied him with no fear. Grayson blinked. "Fixing a leak," he said simply. The girl stepped closer, ignoring the faint hum of warning from the corridor's security panels. "Why are you doing it yourself? Don't you have servants?" He wiped a gloved hand on his pants. "I guess I am the servant," she frowned. "You don't talk like one." He allowed himself a small breath of humor. "Thanks." She crouched beside him, studying the exposed circuitry. "That's from pre-rift design," she said matter-of-factly. "You can't realign those filaments unless you reroute the heat sink." Grayson looked at her sideways. "How old are you?" 7 solar cycles, she replied proudly. "But I read at a 13-cycle level." He smiled. "A real one." It felt rusty on his face. "I'm Lyra," she added, "and I'm not supposed to be here." "That makes 2 of us," he said, reaching for the micro-welder. For a long moment, they sat in silence, him fixing, her watching. Then she whispered, "Are you scared of my mother?" Grayson paused. "I've never met her." "You'd be scared if you had," she said. "Everyone is, except maybe you." He tightened the last bolt and looked at her, not with fear, but with the kind of tired calm that comes from surviving worse than words. "I'm not scared of queens," he said gently, "only of breaking things I can't fix." Lyra tilted her head. "Then you're either very brave or very sad." Grayson didn't answer. He just packed his tools. As he stood, the royal seal glowed briefly on the nearest panel, a warning, unauthorized presence. But neither of them moved. Lyra looked up at him, grinning. "I think I'll visit again." And she did, every single day. The palace's east wing was never meant to echo with laughter, especially not from a child. Its design was clinical, all sterile blue glow and smooth, sound-absorbing walls. Yet now, on the 5th day of Lyra's secret visits, the quiet corridors were alive with something foreign. Joy. Grayson sat cross-legged on the floor, calibrating a pressure sensor. When Lyra appeared without a sound, crouched beside him like a tiny glowing shadow. "Guess what?" she whispered. He glanced at her. "Your mother found out and I'm getting vaporized." She giggled, covering her mouth. "No. I told the guards I was studying diplomatic languages. That gives me 2 hours. Impressive," he muttered, tightening a screw. "Remind me not to play cards with you." She beamed, then leaned closer, watching his hands. "Why are your fingers all wrinkly and gray?" He looked at his hands, streaked with grease and years of exposure to corrosive sealants. "Work does that. They look like roots," she said softly. like they've been holding onto the floor for a long time. He stilled. No one had ever described him like that, not even his daughter. Lyra tilted her head, curiosity swirling in her violet eyes. "Do you have a child?" The question landed softly but settled like a stone in his chest. "Yes," he said, voice low. "Her name's Wren. Where is she?" "She's with the diplomatic nursery staff during my shifts. Not allowed in the palace." Lyra frowned. "But you're allowed?" He chuckled dryly. "Barely. They only let me in because no one else wants to repair the old systems." She looked away, suddenly quiet. "I don't have anyone to play with. My tutors are all drones. My cousins hate me because I don't act like a royal." Grayson set down his tool, giving her his full attention. "There's nothing wrong with being different, Lyra." She nodded slowly, then traced a small shape into the dust on the floor, a circle with 3 dots in the middle. "What's that?" he asked. "My family's crest," she said. "But I don't feel like it fits me." He reached into his toolkit and pulled out a broken circuit shard. Using the dull edge, he carved a new shape beside hers. A small gear wrapped in a protective arc. "That one's mine," he said. She stared at it. "What does it mean? That no matter how forgotten something seems, it still turns, still protects?" Lyra smiled, then did something unexpected. She reached out and touched his arm. Small, gentle fingers against the fabric of his jumpsuit. No hesitation, no disgust, just warmth. Grayson froze, not because it startled him, but because it didn't. "You're not like the others," she whispered. "You listen." He didn't know how to respond, so he simply nodded. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. Somewhere far above, the palace buzzed with politics and protocol, but down here, a little girl with starlight skin had decided a grease-stained human was her favorite part of the day. And Grayson Holt, who had long stopped believing in moments like these, found himself waiting for her next visit more than he cared to admit. Queen Saralith stood at the highest spire of the palace, her crown a living lattice of crystalline threads that pulsed with the rhythm of the throne's ancient memory. From her vantage, she could see the entire city towers shaped like blooming shells, hovercrafts flowing in neat streams, and the illusion of order woven tightly around her empire. But her thoughts were not with the city. They were on her daughter. Lyra had vanished again. For the 5th time in as many days, her attendants had returned with empty excuses and lowered eyes. "Language study," one said. "Script practice," claimed another. Yet when Saralith checked the palace logs, entire sectors flickered with suspicious blackouts, camera feeds silenced, motion detectors overridden, and in every instance, the logs ended near service corridor E7. "Who works there?" she asked coldly, her voice like frost forming on a blade. A steward swallowed hard. "A human, Your Grace. Maintenance tech. Grayson Holt." "Bring him," she ordered. But when the guards arrived at the corridor, the space was empty, only the faint smell of soldered metal and a child's laughter still echoing faintly in the walls. Later that evening, Lyra entered the Queen's chamber with pink cheeks and dust on her knees. "You were with him," Saralith said without turning around. Lyra froze. "With who? Do not insult your lineage with lies." Silence stretched like glass between them. Then, "He's kind," Lyra whispered. "You'd like him if—" The Queen turned sharply, her eyes glowing with the iridescent threat of her people's power. "He is human." "So am I," Lyra shouted, voice trembling now. "Half human, from father's side. Your father is gone." Saralith snapped, the words sharper than she intended. "And you are heir to Aravel. You cannot risk yourself in lower corridors, fraternizing with relics." "He's not a relic," Lyra said, tears forming. "He listens to me. He lets me be real." Saralith's face remained unreadable, carved from diplomacy and rule. "Real is dangerous." Lyra stepped forward. "He has a daughter too. She's like me. You could meet them." "I do not need to meet him," the Queen said. "I need you to stop." The child's breath hitched. For a moment, she looked very small. Then her chin lifted barely, but enough to make her mother pause. "I won't stop," Lyra said. The Queen's jaw clenched. "Then you leave me no choice." Within the hour, the edict was signed. The human technician would be reassigned to the outer sectors, effective immediately. But when the order reached Grayson's terminal the next morning, he read it only once. He didn't curse. He didn't shout. He simply sat there, the hum of the palace fading around him, and thought about the child with violet eyes who had reached out with more grace than any crown ever had. He stood and began to pack. The palace never truly slept, but Grayson's corner of it had fallen quieter than usual. His tool cart stood half-packed beside the wall, a half-folded maintenance schematic draped over it like a discarded thought. He sat on the floor, back against a panel that still hummed faintly with heat, staring at nothing in particular. He hadn't told Wren yet. His daughter lay curled on a cot in the maintenance barracks, the only human child for kilometers, tucked away in a room that smelled of metal polish and recycled air. She had decorated the walls with drawings, stars with smiling faces, crude stick figures holding hands, one scrawled picture labeled "Me and Lyra," with neon crayons stolen from the supply closet. Grayson's fingers hovered over that drawing now, not touching it, just close enough to feel its weight. A reassignment to the outer sectors wasn't just inconvenient, it was exile. Wren would be pulled from her limited education access. No more library drones, no more filtered air. She'd be stuck breathing borderline atmosphere near the fusion waste fields while he repaired bulkheads and prayed her lungs held out. He could have fought the transfer. He could have filed a formal dispute, maybe even appealed to the palace's ethics council, but those were the same channels that hadn't acknowledged humans as citizens, only as contracted functionals, a title with no voice, no standing, no hope. So instead, Saturday, the silence wrapped around him like old grief. Then came the sound of soft footsteps, small, hurried, and too confident for any of the guards. "Why are you leaving?" Lyra's voice pierced the stillness like a breath in cold air. He didn't look up. She stepped closer, chest heaving. "They told me. They said you broke protocol. That you, that I." Her words tangled themselves in panic. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean to get you sent away." Grayson finally looked at her. His eyes weren't angry, just tired. "You didn't do anything wrong," he said gently. She knelt beside him, her tiny hands grabbing his sleeve. "But I made you talk to me. I made you stay when you should have said no. You asked me to listen," he said. "So I did. That's not something I regret." She blinked rapidly, as if refusing to cry in front of him. "I told her you were gentle," she said, "but I think she only hears loud things." Grayson gave a quiet breath of a laugh, not out of amusement, but from the ache of being understood. "My father used to say silence is where the real truths live," he said. "Some people are just too scared to sit in it." Lyra leaned her head against his shoulder, small and glowing. "Will I see you again?" "I don't know," he whispered, but even as he said it, he knew something had already changed. In a galaxy that reduced people to roles and rules, a child had looked at him not as a technician or a trespasser, but as a person worth defending. He couldn't leave yet, not without seeing what that might become. The Royal Archive towered like a frozen storm, a spiraling column of data veins, guarded by firewalls older than the Queen's reign. No child had clearance to enter, especially not one 7 solar cycles old and 3 feet tall. But Lyra was not most children. She walked with purpose, cloak drawn tight around her small form, the shimmering crest of Aravel hidden beneath a dust-gray hood she'd stolen from the laundry drones. Her heart thundered like wings trapped beneath her ribs. She had one goal: to see the truth. Lyra had overheard her mother speaking to the High Advisor the night before, voices sharp and slicing like crystal blades. "The human is not dangerous," the advisor had said cautiously, "but his record, it is incomplete. Incomplete is enough," the Queen had answered. "We've seen what silence can become. I won't risk my daughter for a shadow." So Lyra went searching for the shadow. She reached the biometric gate and hesitated, then pressed her hand to the console. The sensor pulsed. A pause. Then the gate opened. She'd never be able to explain why it allowed her in. Perhaps it was a flaw in the ancient matrix. Or perhaps the archives, like the stars, answered to those who sought truth more than those who demanded control. The chamber inside glowed with warm amber light. No noise, no guards, just rows upon rows of glass memory scrolls suspended mid-air like thought given form. She whispered the name. Grayson Holt. The room stirred. Scrolls shifted, and from the shadows, a single strand of light floated toward her. She reached up. It sank into her hands. His file was sparse. Born on Earth. Engineer class. Volunteered for evacuation after the collapse. Applied for guardian resettlement denied. Lost spouse in transit. Raised child alone. Assigned to Aravel for technical support under category null status. Non-citizen, non-political, restricted access. But one line stood out. Recommended. Observer candidacy. Cross. Species Council trials. File redacted post-Earth Accord failure. Her breath caught. Someone once had believed in him. Not just as a worker, but as a witness. A bridge. She tapped the file again. A flicker, a half-buried image blinked into existence. Grayson, younger, standing before a council of species, shoulders squared, gaze steady, a toddler asleep in a sling across his chest. Lyra's eyes burned. He wasn't a danger. He had been erased. Before she could dig deeper, the lights shifted. Warning pulse. Security sweep. She clutched the file shard to her chest and ducked into a shelving alcove. The sentry drones passed by, unaware. When the hum faded, she slipped out, her face pale and fierce. That night, she stood at the edge of her mother's private garden and whispered to the stars, "You're wrong." And for the first time in her young life, she wasn't just disobedient, she was angry. The Queen's private garden was a place of cultivated silence, not the natural kind, but the heavy quiet that came from generations of restraint. Trees grown from ancestral seedlines, bowed toward a sky laced with violet mist. Pools of still water reflected the floating lanterns, and somewhere beneath it all, orchestral chimes played notes too subtle for most ears. Ceremony was beginning. Delegates from 7 worlds had gathered in the garden that day for the renewal accord, an event to reaffirm Aravel's strength, grace, and isolation. The Queen stood poised on a platform of translucent stone, her crown pulsing with ambient light, her voice prepared to deliver the same practiced lines about unity and strength. But her daughter was missing. Again, just as the Queen opened her mouth to speak, a small voice rang out across the garden. "I have something to say." Gasps scattered through the crowd like dropped glass. Lyra stood at the top of the ceremonial steps, alone, her hair unbraided, her robe askew, and her tiny fist clutching a single memory shard still glowing. The Queen's lips parted, not in welcome, but in alarm. "Lyra, he's not scary," the girl cried, her voice shaking but strong. "He's gentle. You're all wrong about him." The assembly froze. Dozens of alien nobles turned to watch. Chatter erupted in hushed, horrified tones. "Is that the heir? She's lost her senses. She's protecting a human." The Queen stepped forward, every inch of her regal calm strained like glass under pressure. "Lyra, we will speak of this later. You are interrupting an intergalactic proceeding." Lyra didn't move. "I found his file. You told me he was dangerous, a risk. But he was chosen before everything fell apart. You hid that." Saralith's breath caught. Lyra raised the shard high. The light from it scattered across the garden, casting a younger image of Grayson above the gathering, standing tall, child on chest, addressing a council long gone. The silence that followed was unlike any the garden had known. Not delicate, not cultivated, just stunned. "I'm not sorry," Lyra said, her voice trembling. "He's my friend. His daughter is my friend, and if caring about them is wrong, then maybe I'm not the princess you want." Whispers surged into full voices now. Disbelief, outrage, but also curiosity. The Queen's gaze locked onto her daughter. There was fury in her eyes, but beneath it, something older. Fear, or perhaps recognition. "Come down now," she said, "not as a queen, but as a mother." "No," Lyra whispered. "Not until you listen." Grayson stood at the garden's edge, summoned by the chaos, unseen until now. He didn't move forward, he didn't try to take over. He only watched still as stone, jaw clenched, eyes wet. He hadn't told her to speak. She'd chosen to. And in that moment, with the galaxy watching, a child's defiance carried more weight than 1,000 royal decrees. The Queen's chambers echoed with tension. No music, No light but the cold gleam of tribunal fixtures. Queen Saralith stood before the council of nobles, her voice calm but edged with steel. "If my daughter's loyalty has been compromised," she said, "then we must resolve it, not with exile, but clarity." "What are you suggesting?" asked a Palarin dignitary, their feathery crest twitching with suspicion. "A trial," Saralith said. "Not of law, of character," the chamber murmured. She continued, "Grayson Holt will be given one day under the palace's highest surveillance protocols to care for the heir, to protect, mentor, and guide her as if she were his own. If he falters, he is banished from Aravel territory permanently, along with his child. If he succeeds, we will revisit our assumptions." Gasps rippled through the council. "Your Majesty," one matriarch warned, "a test like that grants him proximity to your line, to your blood. He already has her trust," Saralith said flatly. "Let us see if he deserves it." When they summoned Grayson, he did not ask for the terms to be repeated. He simply said, "I accept." The next morning, the palace's atmosphere changed. Cameras blinked to life in every hallway. Drones tracked every move. Servants pretended not to stare. Lyra, bouncing beside Grayson with unshakable glee, chattered endlessly. "Can we go to the sun terrace first? The one where the beams make the floor look like rivers? I want to show you how my eyes change color when I stand in the light." Grayson nodded. "Lead the way." They walked, and the watching eyes followed. But nothing unfolded as expected. Grayson did not flinch in the garden where nobles glared from balconies. He didn't freeze when Lyra ran off script and insisted he tell a story during mid-meal, a story from Earth, about lakes and fireflies and the sound trees make when no one's listening. He guided her calmly through everything. When she grew restless, he redirected with quiet humor. When she tripped on her robes, he knelt, fixed the hem, and whispered, "Everyone stumbles. Doesn't mean you're broken." Throughout it all, he never raised his voice, never took control. He listened, and Lyra glowed under it. But in the late afternoon, just as the trial neared its close, a ripple of alarm cut through the palace's outer ring. A decorative kinetic sculpture malfunctioned. A pillar-sized spiral of crystalline arms began spinning erratically, its energy field collapsing. And Lyra, curious as always, had wandered too close. The crowd screamed. Drones surged, but none reached her first. Grayson did. He threw himself over her, shielding her body with his own, as the sculpture shattered in a spray of humming shards. A piece struck his back, tearing through the fabric and flesh beneath. Blood bloomed in silence. He did not cry out. He only whispered, "Stay still, kiddo. I've got you." The crowd gasped, not just at the wound, but at what it revealed. Because where his shirt tore open, an old scar shone through, etched not by violence, but by the ceremonial blades of a forgotten alliance. An honor mark, human, diplomatic, and long erased from the records. The infirmary hummed with soft biolight and antiseptic mist. Grayson lay on the diagnostic slab, shirt cut away, back glistening with crimson and surgical resin. A med drone hovered above him, emitting a low whine as it cauterized the worst of the wound. He didn't flinch. Beside him, Lyra clung to the side of the bed, her hands trembling harder than his ever had. "You didn't even scream," she whispered. "I had a more important job," he murmured, eyes barely open. "You were scared. I wasn't going to add to it." The door hissed open. Queen Saralith entered without her entourage, alone. Her crown was absent. Her robe was simpler, less a performance, more a presence. Her expression was unreadable, but her eyes, they were not as cold as before. Lyra turned toward her sharply. "You saw what he did. You saw it. I did," the queen said softly. She stepped closer to the bed, her gaze falling on the mark carved into Grayson's shoulder, a three-ringed seal, faded but unmistakable. The mark of the Concord envoys. A diplomatic order disbanded during the Earth Accord collapse. Humans once trained to mediate interstellar disputes. A position of profound trust, until the war broke them. "This is not in your file," she said. Grayson met her eyes, pain dull in his voice. "Because when the Accord died, so did everyone who thought we still mattered. Easier to erase what can't be explained." Saralith studied the mark. You weren't a janitor. I am now, he said. I fix what I can. That hasn't changed. The Queen was quiet. For once, she did not dominate the room. Lyra's voice cracked. He saved me. He always saves people, even if no one notices. The Queen looked down at her daughter, then back at the man who had bled for her. You could have moved. Let the drones get her. I don't move when it matters, he said simply. The Queen's lips pressed into a line. You understand what the court sees. They'll say this was staged, that you put her in danger to prove yourself. He closed his eyes. Let them. The truth doesn't beg. She took a breath, slow, uncertain. What do you want, Grayson Holt? He opened his eyes again. I want my daughter to breathe clean air. I want her to feel like more than tolerated. I want to finish my shifts, go home to her smile, and maybe not have to hide how much we've survived. Saralith looked away. The hum of the infirmary deepened. Then she did something unexpected. She reached out slowly and laid 2 fingers gently against the edge of the mark on his back. Not to test it, to acknowledge it. Lyra stared, eyes wide. You were trained to speak for those without a voice, Saralith said quietly. And now, you are one. Grayson nodded. Once, he didn't need a title. He had the scar, the silence, the daughter, and now a queen who had finally stopped talking long enough to listen. It was nearly midnight when Lyra led him there, still limping, his wound bound tight beneath sterile fabric, but upright. The palace slept around them, save for the low thrum of servers humming beneath the floors. This is off limits, Grayson whispered, eyeing the reinforced door ahead. Your mother will. She doesn't know. I know the override codes, Lyra said, defiant. And if you wait for permission in this place, nothing true ever happens. The child keyed in a string of alien glyphs. The door sighed open. They stepped into the core archive, the vault of minds, history, and intelligence that formed the Queen's Central AI Council, a synaptic network older than most empires. The ceiling was a dome of starlight glass. Beneath it, data flowed like rivers of suspended light. A holographic sentinel formed before them, neither male nor female, a shape of shifting geometry and calm voice. State query, it intoned. Lyra cleared her throat. Access memory stream. Grayson Holt. Cross. Reference diplomatic registry. Earth Concord envoys. Pre-collapse. There was a pause. Then, impossibly, clearance accepted. Memory match found. Grayson blinked. That shouldn't be possible, Lyra grinned. Told you. The room darkened. The starlight above twisted, folding inward, until a 3-dimensional image blinked into being. Grayson, younger by years, stood in a circular chamber, surrounded by aliens of every species, cloaks, scales, skin, feathers, all focused on him. He was clean-shaven, steady-eyed. Ren, barely a year old, peeked from the cloth across his chest. A voice from the projection rang out. Grayson Holt, candidate for Envoy Stewardship, Earth Sector. Testimony accepted, vote unanimous. The image shifted again, another memory. Grayson walking beside a Threxian elder, calmly de-escalating a border dispute. Another, showing him giving a eulogy for a fallen peacekeeper in 3 languages. Then, darker footage, fire raining down, the Accord collapsing, panic in the evacuation halls. One final clip. Grayson standing at a docking bay, refusing to board an officer's vessel until every child was loaded. His own included last. The light faded. Silence filled the vault. The AI's voice returned. Record complete. Would you like to log this memory to the current Royal Index? Grayson didn't speak. He couldn't. His past, scrubbed clean by bureaucracy and politics, was alive again. Not by his own effort, but by a child who refused to let the truth stay buried. Lyra looked up at him. You didn't just survive. You helped people survive. I didn't think anyone remembered, he said, voice ragged. I remember now, she said, and so does the palace. Behind them, the door opened again. They turned, expecting guards. But it was the Queen. She said nothing at first. Her eyes scanned the still glowing memories. And then, for the first time, she bowed her head, not in apology, not yet, but in recognition. Sometimes, she said, our machines remember what our hearts refuse to. She stepped closer. "I won't erase this again." Grayson straightened. "Not taller, just truer." "I didn't come to be seen," he said. "I came so my daughter wouldn't have to hide. And she won't," the Queen said softly. "Not anymore." The Queen called for no court, no council, no spectators, just Grayson. They met in a private observatory high above the spires of Aravel, where silence stretched farther than sound, and the stars felt close enough to speak to. The Queen stood without her ceremonial armor, her shoulders bare beneath a dark wrap, her crown absent once more. Grayson approached carefully, still favoring his left side, his footsteps muffled by the curved obsidian floor. He said nothing at first. Neither did she. Outside, the twin moons climbed over the horizon, spilling silver light across the chamber's glass walls. Between them hung a planet's worth of misunderstandings, politics, and pain. But also 2 children. 1 alien, 1 human, and 2 parents who had done their best with broken tools. "I know your daughter's name is Wren," Saralith said at last. Grayson nodded. "She's 7, just like Lyra." "She drew me something," Saralith said. "Left it tucked under the dining hall table after Lyra snuck her in. A sun with 12 rays and a message, 'Thank you for letting Daddy stay.'" He exhaled through his nose. "She draws like her mother." There was a pause, not empty, but full. Saralith looked up, studying his face. "Tell me about her." Grayson swallowed hard. His throat ached with the words he hadn't spoken in years. Her name was Mera. She was a systems analyst for the Concorde. Bright, braver than me. She stayed behind during the Accord collapse to finish an evacuation loop and never made it out. The Queen's expression softened. "I lost Lyra's father during the Fracture War. A political assassination masked as a shuttle malfunction. I've lived under that silence ever since." Grayson nodded slowly. "You build walls around grief. Pretend it's structure, when it's really just survival." They sat not across from one another, but beside each other, watching the sky. After a long while, Saralith spoke again. "Do you hate me?" He didn't answer immediately. Instead, he touched the edge of his scar, the one where the sculpture had torn through flesh, the same place where the envoy mark still burned faintly. "I hated what you assumed," he said. "But not you. I think you're scared, the same way I was scared when Mara died. The same way I'm scared every time Wren coughs too hard in a room with thin air." The Queen's hands tightened in her lap. "I'm not used to being forgiven." "I'm not offering that," Grayson said. "I'm offering understanding. If we can teach our daughters to look past fear, we can at least try to do the same." Outside, the moons aligned for a moment, casting a soft, rare glow over the observatory. Neither parent moved, but something shifted. Not trust yet, not peace, but a beginning. In the stillness, Saralith reached into her pocket and pulled out Wren's drawing, creased, childlike, sincere. She placed it between them. "A sun," she said, "with 12 rays." Grayson smiled faintly. "One for each year Mera and I had together." And finally, the Queen bowed her head not to a subject, but to someone who knew what it meant to carry loss and keep walking. The Grand Hall of Petition was never meant for children. Its arches loomed like ancient sentinels, carved from obsidian that remembered empires long buried. The air was always cool, the light calculated, neither harsh nor warm, just balanced enough to maintain decorum. At the center of the chamber stood the Spiral of Judgment, a ceremonial platform reserved for royal decrees, treaty signings, and the occasional exile. Today, it held something far more volatile. A small human girl and a small alien princess, standing side by side. Wren clutched Lyra's hand nervously, her braids crooked, her shoes too clean for a place that reeked of bureaucracy. Lyra stood tall beside her, chin lifted, face set with the solemn determination of someone who had memorized every step. Above them, nobles whispered, courtiers scowled, some scoffed outright, but no one stopped them. Because when the heir to the Aravellan crown invokes the right of appeal, the court must listen, no matter who stands beside her. The Queen entered last. She made no announcement, no grand gesture, but when she appeared at the far doors, the hall fell instantly silent. Her gaze moved from her daughter to Wren, and finally to Grayson, who stood just beyond the spiral's edge. He gave her a small nod, not of challenge, but of support. Lyra stepped forward. "I invoke the right of two," she said, her voice steady. "As heir to the throne of Aravel, I petition the court to recognize a bond of guardianship, not of blood, but of choice." Gasps rippled. A right this old had not been called in generations. Not since the days when interstellar adoption served to seal peace between species. The right of two allowed a child to request the formal recognition of a guardian who had protected them, taught them, or stood in place of lost family. It was meant for emergencies, but Lyra saw no difference. "I stand with Ren," she continued, "because she's not just his daughter, she's my friend. And I stand with her father because when no one else listened, he did. When I was scared, he didn't laugh. When I was in danger, he bled to keep me safe." Ren looked up at her, eyes shimmering. "I don't want a new planet," she said softly. "I want somewhere we're allowed to stay." The Queen said nothing. The chamber waited. One by one, the old holographic seals of the rite began to flicker to life around the spiral of judgment, ancient symbols of protection, choice, and unity. Lines of light curled up the walls, reacting not to authority, but to sincerity. The court couldn't stop it. The hall itself responded. Grayson stepped forward, just barely into the light. He didn't speak. He didn't bow. He simply placed one hand on each child's shoulder, not as a performance, but as a promise. The Queen took one breath, then another, and then, at last, she stood from her throne and descended the stairs, not to stop the rite, but to witness it. The Queen stood at the base of the spiral of judgment, her footsteps slow, deliberate. The hem of her robe brushed the ancient runes circling the platform, each one glowing now, not because of ceremony, but because of the sincerity spoken into them. The entire hall held its breath. No one knew what she would do, not even her advisors, who had already begun preparing contingency speeches in their heads. Not even the nobles, whose pupils darted between Grayson and the throne, as if trying to calculate which way power would fall. And not even Lyra, whose hand tightened protectively around Ren's. The Queen reached the spiral's edge and looked up, not at her daughter, not yet, but at the human man who stood beside her. Grayson's face was unreadable. Still, tired maybe, but present, ready for whatever came next, even if it was exile. "You've defied my orders," Saralith said softly, "interfered with a royal heir, accessed restricted archives, bypassed security." "And I have," Grayson said, "because my daughter had nowhere else to go, and because yours wouldn't stop seeing who I really was." Lyra stepped forward again. "You told me a crown must protect the smallest voice in the room. Today, that voice was ours." Saralith looked at her child, her stubborn, luminous child, and felt something unravel inside her. Not control, not fear. Something older, loneliness. She turned to Ren, who stood silent but unafraid. The girl's eyes reminded her of someone she'd lost, a man who had believed in quiet power, in patience, in making peace with small hands and gentle words. The way this child stood now, proud and vulnerable, made her feel as if he were in the room again. The Queen lowered herself to one knee. The chamber gasped. Not in confusion, in disbelief. No ruler in living memory had ever knelt on the spiral. Saralith reached out and took Ren's hand first, then Lyra's. "You are heard," she said, "and you are enough." Then, slowly, she looked up at Grayson. "I built this palace on the assumption that silence was safety," she said, "but I forgot. Sometimes silence is just the absence of truth, and sometimes truth speaks in the voice of a janitor, a mechanic, a father." She stood, then lifted the golden brooch from her shoulder, the one that symbolized command, not as a ruler, but as a guardian of peace. Without fanfare, she extended it to Grayson. "This is not a title. It is not a bribe. It is an invitation." He stared at it for a moment, then reached out, not with greed or pride, but the same steadiness he'd shown in everything else. He took it, and the hall erupted not into cheers, but into stunned, reverent silence. A silence that, for once, felt like respect. Grayson looked to Ren. She smiled, not the shy one, but the smile that meant she finally believed they were allowed to belong. And Lyra, glowing beside her, whispered, "See, I told you the crown listens. You just have to speak the right way. The galaxy did not change overnight. Treaties weren't rewritten in a single breath, and old prejudices didn't dissolve like morning mist. But something had shifted, not in law, but in expectation, in the way people looked at the spiral of judgment, in the way they looked at each other, and most of all, in the way they looked at him. Grayson still wore his old utility uniform, still rose at dawn, still wiped down handrails, calibrated sensors, and fixed valves that screamed for attention and never got it. But now, when he passed through the hallways, eyes met his not to glare or inspect, but to greet. A small nod here, a good shift there, a whisper of dignity restored. He didn't need more than that. The Queen, true to her word, didn't crown him. She did something better. She included him. He was brought into the council chambers not as a figurehead, but as a voice. Not every noble accepted it. Some seethed. A few resigned. But none could argue with the mark on his back, or the day he stood in fire to protect their heir. Wren was enrolled in the palace's cross-species academy. Her name was on the same class list as Lyra's, and their desks were side by side. She brought her crayons on the first day, unprompted, and offered one to each student. By the end of the week, there were drawings of suns and stars and little girls holding hands taped to the walls, symbols that didn't need translation. The rite of two, once viewed as outdated ceremony, was re-examined. Other children came forward, other bonds were recognized, other truths were spoken aloud. And the Queen, she changed. Too, not in the grand way rulers rewrite policy, but in the quiet way mothers carry memory. Her crown still pulsed with ancient light, but now it often sat beside her on the council table, not above her head. She listened more, interrupted less. And when Lyra sat beside her, whispering thoughts that would have once been dismissed, she let them land like seeds on new soil. One morning, Grayson found himself standing on the sun terrace, the same one Lyra had wanted to show him long ago. The light passed through the prism glass floor, scattering rivers of soft gold beneath his feet. Wren ran ahead, laughing as Lyra chased her, the two of them spiraling through sunbeams like orbiting moons. "They look like they belong," he said quietly. The Queen stood beside him. "They do." He turned to her. "You ever regret how long it took?" She hesitated. "I regret letting fear wear the shape of protection." Grayson nodded. "That's an honest answer." She glanced down at the floor where the girls danced. "You taught her that," she said. "To question, to challenge, to feel." She already knew how, he said. She just needed someone who didn't flinch when she did. And far above them, stars blinked into existence, uncaring of status, unsilenced by law. They simply burned. Because stars don't ask permission to shine, they just do.